Opinion appears to be split in Russia over the war in Ukraine. State media in the country has not been using words like war or invasion to describe the conflict. Instead, outlets have called it a special operation, Vladimir Putin's preferred term. Russian authorities are also cracking down on any dissent, blocking independent news outlets and arresting protesters. With us now is Sam Klebanov, who's from St. Petersburg, Russia. He came to the United States when he was 6 years old, but his family is still back home. We want to talk to him about how Russian immigrants here in the United States are viewing the fighting. Sam, thanks so much for joining us. It's been really sort of depressing to see how some folks have reacted to what's happening in Ukraine here in the United States, where you've seen Russian restaurants, Russian businesses, from people who may be either like you, that were born in Russia, or are third generation Russian Americans who have a restaurant where they serve traditional Russian foods, have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in Russia currently, and yet they're being attacked. And it kind of reminded me a little of how we treated Muslims in the wake of 9/11 here in this country. How does it look to you?
First of all, thank you for having me here on the program. But I think that obviously what Russians are experiencing right now in the U.S. Is nowhere near the level of Islamophobia that befell Muslims in the wake of 9/11. However, obviously, there's a lot of tension. A lot of Russians are themselves heartbroken at what's going on in Ukraine, including myself and my family. But I think it's a lot of people, especially Russians that run businesses like my father, who has a bookstore in the Boston area, a Russian language bookstore, are worried about the impacts and the attitudes that this is going to inspire about the Russian community. So like you've said, a lot of restaurants, including here in Boston, have been getting threats or unpleasant messages. So I don't think it's necessarily a worry about physical safety, but more a concern about the attitudes that we'll be facing about whether people will want to patronize the businesses that we run, whether people will want to engage with Russian culture and Russian literature in the case of our bookstore. So these are definitely very real concerns at the moment.
So I know you've been talking to some of your family members back in Russia. So I have a sort of a two-part question for you. Are your family members supporters of Vladimir Putin? And what is their understanding of what is happening in Ukraine?
Well, I certainly have some family members who are opposed to Vladimir Putin's regime. So we've had many conversations about their thoughts on both what's going on in Ukraine and in general about the policies of Putin's government over the years. And they do not support what's going on. They're horrified, like many people around the world, at what's happening and heartbroken. And some of them have family and relatives in Ukraine, and they're worried about them. At the same time, I do have some relatives, especially older people, who, sort of buy into the propaganda and brainwashing that takes place on Russian state-owned or sponsored media. So they view this through the lens that is provided to them by the state media. So they have these delusional beliefs that the Russian military is conducting a limited scale military operation in Ukraine, that they're quote unquote denazifying Ukraine, which of course to most people who have access to independent media sources, to them, this sounds like a completely delusional view of the world. But unfortunately, a lot of people that get most of their information from state media, they buy into this narrative, and it's especially devastating and disturbing to see how this brainwashing is taking place over many years. So it's not like the propaganda started last week. Or 2 weeks ago with the invasion. This has been going on for many years, and the Russian government has been conducting a very systematic, consistent effort to root out any independent media in Russia. There's been repressions against journalists. There's been a few instances of murders of journalists, independent journalists that speak the truth about what's going on. So
I think you make a really good point, Sam, that a lot of us sort of may sit and think, well, how can they believe what is sort of clearly incorrect information about what's happening in Ukraine? But we're not just talking about something that's unfolding over months. We're talking about something that's unfolding over years,
right.
Years of misinformation. But I wanted to ask you, of the family members who do not believe the Vladimir Putin messaging, where are they even accessing their information from? Because as we understand it, social media has been shut down. As you point out, independent media has been shut down. So where are they getting their information about what's actually happening in Ukraine?
So until recently, so actually today, I believe Facebook has been designated as an extremist organization in Russia, and a couple of days ago it was blocked. But until the beginning of the invasion, it was possible to access a lot of the social media platforms that we have here in the U.S. So like Facebook, Instagram, that you could. There were a few independent Russian language news sources. Some of them were based in Russia. So there was actually an independent, or I shouldn't call it independent, news organization that was sponsored by paradoxically by the Russian state-owned gas company, but it was called Echo of Moscow. It was a radio station that had on a variety of journalists with different opinions. So there was some variety in news that you could get. So now currently Telegram is the main platform for independent news. So there's a bunch of Telegram channels that publish live updates on the war in Ukraine that are freely publishing criticism of the Putin government. So I believe most people who want to access independent information about what's going on, they use Telegram at the moment.
Sam, real quick before we let you go, I'm glad that you told us earlier that you haven't seen the level of anti-Russian hate that Muslims saw in the wake of 9/11, and we saw it even before that during World War II with the internment of Japanese Americans and German Americans who faced criticism here in the United States. But your business, your family's business, relies on Russian imports. So how has this affected you just personally, you and your family?
Well, it's difficult. I think it's too early to tell at the moment, but this will definitely have an impact on our imports because obviously we rely on cargo shipments from Russia to get the books into the U.S. So now that air cargo has been disrupted, as well as just the Russian publishing industry is going to be devastated by the sanctions, by the economic situation in Russia. So we're really worried about, the supply of books, about our ability to import the books, and in general about, how many books are going to be written and published, especially by some of the authors and publishing houses that are independent of the government and critical of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Sam Klebanov, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.